So what we're going to do right now is we're going to transition and pivot. I'm going to invite Jacob Rugh to come up. Jacob is an associate professor of sociology. He studies residential segregation, immigration, race, ethnicity, housing, and discrimination. I've asked Jacob to speak to us to help set the stage a little bit for the panel discussion that we're going to segue into in a minute. Do you want to change to your presentation as I introduce you? Jacob, together with some of his colleagues, Ryan Gabriel and others, have done a lot of very important work about better understanding the importance of diversity here on campus and the way that it impacts certain students, well, all students, but certainly impacts students differently. He's going to share some vision kinds of ideas here. And then after he's done with that, we're going to invite our panelists to come on up and he's going to lead the discussion. Anything else you want me to say before you start?
All I'm going to say is I can't see that's too small. I just don't know where
I know it's yeah. Lori, if you want.
All right. We've recovered from the tech support. Okay. Thanks again to the support team. Appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to take 21 minutes. I have a grace minute, so please keep track for me. Thank you for inviting me, Associate Dean Oscarson, and there's so many people that have mentored me here that I have the utmost respect for. 2016, I met with a colleague from an Ivy League university, and he said to me, "It must be nice to be at BYU." And I said, "Now, why is that?" He said, "Because you always have something to fall back on. Whenever you stalemate in class, whenever there's anything controversial, you must at least always have a foundation, right?" I said, "Yeah, you're right. But I've never had anybody think of it that way and say that to me who's not a member of my faith community in BYU." I said, "We do have a foundation." And ever since he told me that, about 4 years into my teaching, it's never been the same, as I've realized that we do have a foundation to build on. And so Chip talked about training for those teaching diversity, unity, and belonging, and this is, I would consider training number 0 right now. So we're all going to get together, and that includes the wonderful panel discussion. And I want to thank Lori and DJ and Mike for participating in advance. So number 1, getting us in this idea of a vision, right off the bat, students need not ignore difficult and important questions. What are those questions? Well, how do we, as Elder Ballard has commanded us in 2017, eliminate racism, sexism, and nationalism, right? How do we foster true unity, right? Lasting equality, right? And those benefits that come from true patriotism and belonging. Those are really hard questions. For those of you who've done the honors program, you know about the great questions approach. That is the idea here, right? These are great questions. They're worth asking. And you know how these BYU students are. How can I fix the problem? How do I get out there? What service project do I do? You have to slow them down and stop them and say, you need to understand the problem first. And you need to understand that first off, your professor who's worked on, a dozen civil rights cases, who's published, who's worked with people from all over the world on solving these problems, I don't have all the answers. You're going to get answers in your own sphere that I won't get. Can we imagine the way that we pay so many people to Windex the steps, to wipe the windows, to edge the lawns, that we employ so many people, and I know there's a shortage of 1,000 people in grounds right now. Can we imagine unleashing our students and faculty and staff and alumni to solve these problems, to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem? That is where the vision begins. And we have been given greater light and knowledge. We know that white supremacy is not in harmony with the gospel. And we know we have a strong and firm foundation. So let's describe this issue better in this vision from Sister Eubank. In this talk, I'm really curious if she said that is being pulled apart, if that was written down, or if she added that. I think she added that impromptu, right? There are people attempting to pull apart our society for profit and gain and they don't care, right? They don't share our values. And as those forces rise up in society, right, as we hold hearings, right, in our nation's capital about January 6th and so forth, as those forces rise up, it says there has to be a strong sentiment and skill set, right? This is where GE comes in. We have plenty of students who have a strong sentiment. They're ready to go like the Energizer Bunny. They need a skill set. There may be some of us in this room who feel like I have a very strong skill set in my discipline or my area, but I would like to get more of a sentiment when it comes to this topic of diversity and belonging. You have that desire like Alma talks about. But there's got to be a sentiment and a skill set. There's got to be the spiritual, the intellectual, right, the emotional, right, and the academic. It all has to be there, right? We need every component. Sister Eubank was so on point. And she used the example of a black principal in Salt Lake welcoming Syrian refugees and saying high fives are mandated, right? I'm not going to read all these quotes, but I do want to tell you that everybody in this slide is a Chicagoan, and we're all from the south side of Chicago, to be specific. And it was there that the branch that I grew up in grew from 50 people to over 400 people, became about 45% African American, 45% white American. Very unusual in our church. But as a child, seeing Santa Claus as a black man, the source of all gifts and good things for kids, right? You can imagine the socialization effect there, right? You child development experts. I thought that was normal, okay? And that's how I grew up. And I wrote my essay to get into BYU way back in 1995. Those were the days. I tell my students, you missed out on a golden era of the 90s. 1995, I wrote about my 4x400 relay team and how we were all, captains of the swimming team and I was cross-country team captain, football team captain, basketball team, and then in the spring we all did track together. Everybody went on to go to college and get a master's degree and beyond. And I said they always accepted me for who I was. And we talk about race and when did you know you were your race and so forth. And so for white people, they always haven't thought of that. But I remember that all my friends would cut their hair every week and ask me, don't you need a haircut? I said, I don't need a haircut every week. And they all put a pick in the back of their hair back in the 80s when they had the bigger hairstyles, and the pick would just fall right out of my hair onto the ground, right? But that was a different experience. And my father, when it was so difficult, he was the bishop and he worked in a very multiracial, multi-ethnic work council to help build a building. It took a long time. And he described where we met on 3 levels. We were bursting at the seams. As our humble home, he said, as a model of unity and diversity. And Elder Oaks, who, as you know, completed his law degree at the University of Chicago, came and dedicated our chapel. It was a day that changed his life. You can ask me more about that later. And that was something that set the stage. And Rachel, who was my TA, I'll say more about later, she was a member of the same ward in the same building. Now, what is this idea that's pulling us apart? There are a lot of things that are pulling us apart. And one of them at the core is the false idea that is the antithesis of our Heavenly Parents' plan and the plan of salvation, is the idea that if one person, and in particular, if one group does better, then therefore one group must do worse. Anybody who's taken Econ 110, I was an Econ undergrad at BYU, prepared me well, knows that comparative advantage, you can grow the economic pie. That is a false principle. But that idea has a stranglehold, especially on people in the majority in the society. In our society, that is white people. And Frederick Douglass himself absolutely rejected that idea. He said the white man's elevation, right, does not depend here. I'm flipping it up. I'm switching it up on the black man's degradation, right? As we continue to diversify our faculty, our students, as this becomes an amazing ladder of social mobility, can you imagine the potential of a university where people don't leave with debt, right? Of the potential for social mobility, right? That is unrealized. We will all benefit tremendously. Another part of the Vision Foundation comes from the leaders of the NAACP and President Nelson. And you see these 2 quotes, and some of you are familiar more with the second one maybe than the first. And the first one is a lot about teaching our children, teaching our students, teaching in our classrooms. The second one is a lot about looking in the mirror. Our own department is re-envisioning our major, for example. to align with this new vision. Looking in the mirror and saying, what are we doing? How are we mentoring? How are we researching? What is our process like? How inclusive is it? Every single one of us can do better. There are things that we can count and report on and so forth and so on. We know that rooting out racism, healing its wounds, and building bridges of understanding is the responsibility of every member of the BYU community. And that means we're all going to be inspired and live close to spirit, and we're going to do it in different ways. We're going to have different times in our career to do that. But I really want you to remember, and I know that some of our panelists may or may not have time to speak to this, but healing its wounds is important. There are a lot of wounds from the past that our alumni, students, staff, and faculty, that healing is required. And that is important. And compassion, I want to bring in as a Christ-like attribute later on. And so this is my way of reminding myself to do that later, okay, which I will. Now, I'm a scholar of race and ethnicity, and that, of course, concerns immigration and related issues, but primarily race. But President Worthen has reminded us, this was last August, I believe, that this is about a lot more than racism. And I want to just add to nationality, we're hoping to get immigration status and Dreamers specifically encoded into this Office of Belonging effort. And I know that Vice President Hernandez is very much wanting to do that. And we have 2 Dreamers traveling to Washington, D.C. right now, Nori Gomez de Baibi and Nadia Herron, who are there in Washington, D.C. for the 10-year anniversary of DACA. So I'm very proud of our Dreamers here at BYU. So when you look at this picture, you notice it's about 3/4 women. Another thing that stands out loud at BYU is about half of the people there are Black. There are people that are Jamaican American, Black and Canadian, Mexican American, Filipina. There are many multiracial individuals. There are people that are adopted. There are 50% of them are either immigrants or children of immigrants. There's one of them whose father was a bishop and was undocumented, and her citizen brother was able to sponsor him in a very rare way to gain status in this country. There are so many stories there. There's a young woman who grew up in Utah who absolutely blew away the class by saying that she had to hide in a trunk when all of these young men were riding around Confederate flags with their trucks and terrorizing her, and all her white friends in Utah helped protect her. That was not something that any of us saw coming. But she felt safe to express that in class and share. And so many, and Grace there on the end, who's been in the Salt Lake Tribune, I think no fewer than 3 times this last week, based on all her wonderful research she presented at MHA last week. All right, so I've got my one typo here, like Stephen King, kind of on purpose to make sure you're paying attention. The second bar, that MCAT pre-med, that should be for the first bar for Sociology 111. So since 2014, pre-med students are required to take intro to sociology and psychology. It's been a wonderful experience having those pre-med students. You know, they're all about the grades and the performance and everything. And they really have been wonderful. I had one student named Matt, who is a really tall white guy, really, really tall, taller than any of the white guys I see here today. And he said, you know, I know what the problem is. We're just paying too much attention to race. We're just talking about it too much. And that's the problem. And I'm sure of it. And we just got to stop talking about race and we'll all go away. And I'm like, well, you know about statistical methods, right? Like, you know, a cause has to precede an effect, you know. But methods aside, he went through that class and had an integrated project group. And in my classes, people have to apply it and go out and do a project, right? They have to live it, right? And the BYU students beg for that kind of stuff. And he had and every group is supposed to be integrated. And his group was racially integrated. And he, by the end of the class, this tall guy, right? I always remember, he was so tall, Matt. And he's a doctor now. And he said, we gotta go out there. We gotta get everybody to take these classes. We gotta require it. We gotta tell the news. We gotta on the rooftops. And I'm like, there you go, right? He's unleashed an agent of change. I had another young man who's multiracial, African-American from Minnesota. And his sister's on the faculty now, Family Life, Andrea Kinghorn Busby, Chris Kinghorn. And he didn't need to take any of my classes, neuroscience major. He ended up taking 3 of my classes, urban sociology, race and ethnicity, and the grad seminar on race. He was so fascinated with how the brain was like, you know, the network socially and so forth and so on. He's an ER doctor now. And now my point is that both of them, from very opposite ends of the spectrum, are both highly trained with a sentiment and a skill set. And as doctors, they have told me how it's helped them every day in their career, okay? So I put this slide up here just to tell you, when I get up here and I get excited, you might think, oh, well, it's all selection, it's just sociology majors, just those kids over there. No, no, no. Almost everybody I teach is not a sociology major. And most of them don't become sociology majors and minors, right? This is pure GE, right? General education for the general audience. Okay, I had a young woman that did, her story just fits this so well from the GE documents. And you didn't get time to say this, so now see, I'm helping you out here. When you look at that GE redesign, we had a young woman from the Bronx, and I've had so many first instances, I'll tell you about a couple more in a minute. And she was at BYU when she was at the end of her first year, and she was taking this at the end of winter semester. And in my classes, this is something for your notes if you want to write it down. I always have people reflect and reflect and reflect. This is the 30th time I've asked her to reflect on the class and what she's learned. And she's in her final essay, and she says, this entire year at BYU, as a young Latina woman from the Bronx who went to a very good high school, was the top of my class, every white person, with some exceptions that faded away, it was obviously almost every white person that said, you're only here because you're brown, right? Because BYU was forced to accept you, or some, I know that we don't subscribe to those things. We know BYU doesn't practice affirmative action. The admissions department has great YouTube videos, very high budget, they're wonderful, right? But the white students, they all said that to her. And what happened to her? She started to lose her mojo. She started to internalize that racism, and it completely paralyzed her. And she had this learning experience. And this is what I want to tell you is so beautiful that connects with what my panelists are going to talk about. At the end of class, she said, now I want to learn about the Native American experience. I want to learn about the Black American experience, the Afro-Latino experience. I want to learn about Dreamers. I want to learn about all these things, all the other groups. She said, she completely turned outward and said, I'm going to go to all of these clubs. I'm going to go to these events. I'm going to take other classes and other disciplines. You see what I mean? She didn't turn inward and say, I'm a victim. She turned outward and became an agent of change. All right, so GE Academy. You want to come, you want to hear something that gets you excited, but also you want to think of practical stuff. So in 2019, God kept sending me the signal. Everywhere I went, I saw Educated and Becoming as the two top selling books, right? In the airport, Barnes & Noble, everywhere, right? The algorithms on Amazon. And I was like, these books are great. And I was like, I just finished Becoming. I read both of these. I mean, they're amazing. And I'm like, why don't we just put them in conversation? Just like our good colleague Sharon Harris does with Shakespeare and contemporary Black authors in English, right? Let's put them in conversation. Both women, both lower income, both first-gen students, pretty much that's it, right? Everything else is very different. Tara Westover is almost a caricature in terms of how extreme her story is. And just by a raise of hands, how many people read Educated by Tara Westover? Okay, all right, a few. I'm not gonna ask about Becoming. I know it's fewer, right? That's okay. But the thing is with Tara Westover, think about it in terms of diversity, unity, and belonging, right? You think about how that's the antithesis of diversity, how poor, how isolated, how uneducated, and how white her upbringing was, okay? How much of a detriment that was to her. But think about how she got to college, and there's a spoiler, there's two terms that she'd never heard. I won't tell you the first one that all the white people think of. I want you to tell you the second one. The second one was civil rights movement. She had never heard of the term civil rights movement. And she wrote in her notes, 1965, and she put on the margins, remember what she put in the margins? She said, that must be a typo. Because I just learned about was slavery in Lincoln in 1865. What happened for 100 years, right? How many people know about sharecropping and lynching, right? And convict leasing, right? That slavery persisted until 1941 when there was a circular, right, in the war, and they ended all those debt peonage and convict leasing systems, right? So many people don't have that education, right? Don't know that 19 out of 20 people that were Asian American who went to Supreme Court, right, petitioned to be counted as white, and that racialized system was in there until the 50s and 60s, right? She didn't have this knowledge. And so stunning when you think about the asymmetry. As a white woman, she got to college at BYU with that level of ignorance, right? She was a prodigy and she was amazing. And education changed her life, and she went on to get a PhD at Cambridge University. But think about how impossible that would be for a Black person, right? To be able to have that level of ignorance. Well, first of all, just daily life, that's impossible. We know from sociology that Black people have to navigate the white space as a condition of existence and to gain the rewards of suburbia, corporations, and the university, but white people don't have to navigate the Black space, right? Michelle Obama's kindergarten class was 50% white and 50% black. And by the time she got to 6th grade, white flight was over and her school was all black. But she went to one of the greatest high schools in Chicago, the most racially integrated one, which is the highest achieving, Whitney Young High School. And when we put these two things in conversation, the students could start to identify a little bit more with Michelle, right? Whereas some had identified with Tara. And I love some of the white guy energy that kind of came from some of the white guys, because they said, you know, I loved reading these two things. They said, I never felt defensive. I didn't feel accused. I didn't feel blamed. I said, yeah, man, you don't need to feel bad, right? You know, some of these things, these burdens started to come down. And of course, the students loved it because they're not reading the textbook. They're not listening from me or reading anything I wrote. They're reading absolutely fantastic written chapters. So we had them kind of learn these ideas of social status, master status. They all said that Tara's master status was her social class. And I said it was actually her race, because everybody assumed she didn't need help because she looked like she was just another white girl, but she was undergoing so much turmoil, right? So wonderful activity. And the reason why I want to bring it up is you can choose whatever activity you want, but all of the first-gen students began to share their stories, right? A white person from Tooele who played soccer with all the refugees, somebody from Star Valley, right? Another person from Houston, so on and so forth and so on. And they began to speak up and feel empowered and feel confident and say, wow, I can see that I'm just as smart as the other students. I just lack cultural capital, or I don't have a parent who went here. And it's been a wonderful activity. So to top it off, and I'll make this fast, Rachel Weaver also went to Whitney Young High School, just like Michelle Obama when she was Michelle Robinson. And she was my TA of the class. And so she talked about her experience going to the highest performing public high school in Chicago, which also is not coincidentally, I think, because it is the most racially diverse high school, which is very rare in Chicago. And you can see there all of her friends going to great universities, including her friend who's in the stake, who's LDS, who bypassed BYU, went to Columbia. And Rachel felt like she received a revelation to come to BYU, and I think the rest is kind of history. So we know that diversity is rising very slowly at BYU. We know in some cases it has flatlined. For example, for Native students, it's been about 150 now for about a decade. For Black students, it has flatlined. For Asian Americans, most of that is because of the way we've made immigration so difficult. The Asian students has really come down, and the Canadian student share has increased recently because of our nation's immigration policies. But we do see the Latino students continue to rise rapidly. And I wanted to make sure that I talked just briefly about 2 Asian American students here before I wrap up and conclude. I remember starting class in 2018 and saying that for some of you, this class will be the first time that you begin to deal with this topic about race and belonging, racism and fighting racism and rooting out racism. I said, for others of you, this is a burden you've carried your entire life, and you may have felt misunderstood by everybody, including your own family and your own parents. And there was an Asian American student from Arkansas in the 5th row who just started crying like crazy. And so I'm thinking, I'm making a student cry here. I'm doing a bad thing. And so I come up to her immediately afterwards. I asked her if I could give her a hug. I gave her a hug. And I said, I'm so sorry I'm making you cry in class. She said, no, I just want to tell you. Ooh, I'm going to cry now. She said, that was the first time I ever felt validated in my entire life for what I have faced. It's an extreme case. That doesn't happen every semester, but it was a very memorable one. And I think just telegraphing some compassion just to start out in a way that may not seem like a big deal to you, you never know what it could mean to that student that's out there. I'm not going to read all of this, but I had another Asian American student who was multiracial and who said, my parents weren't the tiger mom stereotype and all of that. And she said, once I understood how immigration law hyper-selected, right, Asian immigrants who are more educated than the people in their home country and the US, and then that sets the standard for everybody else. And we switched from a yellow peril to a model minority stereotype in less than 2 generations. People's genes don't change in 2 generations, by the way, right? There's not a scientific racist explanation for that. She said, once that I understood it all clicked. I knew what I was going through. I made sense of it. And now I can go out and educate other people, right? And I can free my own children who I'll raise someday from these stereotypes. And she was incredibly empowered. Just like we talked about earlier on, people were empowered to become agents of change. And she said to segue into my last part, so I can finish on time, that she found joy, right? She found joy. And she says based on fact and faith, right? You think about the faith that so many students, students who are not LDS, students who don't fit the profile, right? There's lots of ways that people can be marginalized. The faith that it takes for them every day to go back into that classroom, right? To go back with their roommates, to feel misunderstood. It's an act of faith. And many of them have received specific revelation, right, from God to be here. And I just love that sentiment. Okay. Real quick, Dr. Ryan Gabriel and I, we've been just surveying our students at the beginning and the end of every semester. So if you think it's all about just stories and kumbaya and trust falls and all that stuff, right? No, we have a social sciences. We met with our dean a couple of weeks ago. We're going to do a longitudinal survey and survey people after they've graduated. And we're going to really make an amazing contribution to social science. So there's a whole measurement to what we're talking about. And many of us have worked for years. And I remember those early years when I didn't have students who had taken my intro class, and it was really, the time of famine. We have worked for years curating syllabi, working so hard and counting things to get to this point. And for each one of us, it will be different, whatever that threshold effect is. When you get beyond a certain threshold of diversity, it really changes the atmosphere in your class. Where you see a guy like Matt be influenced by a Black woman in his group. It doesn't, you know what I mean? We all know about this, right? We know about these controversies, right? An algorithm or a computer is not going to solve our questions that Jesus said or weightier matters of justice, right? There's no magic number. But there is a substantial difference. There is a threshold effect when you have enough students of color. When I had 8 Native students from different tribes, I had 22 Latino students in one class, one semester, right? That is a difference, right? When one person doesn't have to speak on behalf of their entire race, and everybody who's LDS who had to explain everything to somebody who's not LDS, and everybody assumed you spoke for everybody who's LDS, right? You know what that feels like, right? When you can get beyond that, you can really unleash some amazing things. So in that sense, diversity is not the same as integration or belonging, but diversity is a prerequisite to get to belonging and unity, right? To get there, okay? So the joy. I had a story about that. I'm going to skip it for the sake of time and tell you these women who I've mentored, and I cannot take credit for their success. I can just tell you about the blessings that I've received in my life. These women going to Georgetown, Qualtrics, Harvard Law, others now at University of Maryland, Maxwell Institute, University of Chicago Law School, right? Black woman who was LDS going there. Talk about changing the stereotype, right? Of Chicago Law School. I have been so tremendously blessed in my life, and I found so much joy in both the trial that they faced and that I faced with them, and I've advocated with them, and also the amazing victories that they have achieved, especially when we think about Tanisha, who established the Women of Color Club on campus, and people told her for years that she shouldn't do that and she wouldn't be able to do that, right? And she did that, and it's thriving, right? We are blessed, right? Just like Carolina Nunez said in her devotional, right? It is so powerful that it's the Samaritan, right, who's at the center of the story and the one who blesses the lives of others, right? The person that people think somehow is a charity project or somehow less than. Remember, we've got it all backwards, right? We've got it all backwards, right? They are the blessing in our lives. And I had so many women invest in my education. I had Karen Brotherson here in honors in this very building in 1995. Christine Hansen, I know many of you know her from English. My own mom, Renata Forresty, so many. So I find so much joy in helping women go out there and achieve at such a high level because they have given so much to me. So to conclude, we have to change the narrative if we want to be free. And Dr. Gabriel, myself, DJ, many others, we have spent a lot of time with students of color at BYU, with Black, Indigenous, and people of color students. And I will tell you that the number one reason that we have found why BYU is diversified so slowly and has not become that diverse as fast as we'd like is because of the narrative, right? That people have gone out and told people, I have gone through this excruciating time here. Don't come here. Don't do that, right? For your own protection and safety. That narrative has to change. How will it change? It will not change magically just by commanding people to change the narrative, right? We have to conclude, this is my last slide, we have to go from a vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle. And this is a vision that Ryan Gabriel, that's him there, Ryan and I share. And Ryan is the first African-American to get tenure at BYU. CFS, I know, sorry, call it the wrong name. The first African, not the first Black person, the first African-American. That is astounding. And so we had a talk the other day about who's going to be the second person and the third and the fourth and all the way up to the 10th person. And we have a whole project here of mentoring and working with others to see who are the next 10 people, right? And who are the next 10 after that. And we are determined to see that next 10 in this next 10 to 20 years. We're not satisfied. And we're all going to be blessed. So divine identity, community of belonging, rooting out racism, finding that unity and diversity. I can just testify to you that I've found joy in doing that. And now I will turn the time over to the panel. I'll say that in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Okay, and we'll have, we've got Lori first, then DJ. DJ, your last name ends with an S though, right? And then Mike Taylor. And I've got one question for you, and then we can have some questions. I've been told we have till about 11:05, maybe 11:07, because 7 is a lucky number, okay? And so let's get it started. So my question for you all, and then you guys don't have to hear from me again, is about diversity, unity, and belonging, about the requirement, about what you've seen in your own department, and then DJ, in particular for you, about what you've done in your 200 level history class for GE students, as well for DJ and Mike about the civil rights seminars, other experiences you've had in the department. I've kind of focused more narrowly on one thing, so there's so many other dimensions, diversity and belonging. So go ahead, you can each take about 5 minutes, and we can't wait to hear from you. Thank you.
So I'm Lori Spruance. I'm in the Department of Public Health. I don't teach a general education class, but I was part of the general education redesign specific for diversity, unity, and belonging. And so I had the pleasure of working with DJ on that project. Thanks, Chip, for inviting me and Susan to be part of that. And so that was a really unique opportunity to think about what we want our students to be able to go out into the world and be equipped with in terms of diversity, unity, and belonging. I'm also part of my department's diversity and inclusion committee. And part of that committee, we did our own survey within our department to understand some of the experiences of students within our department. And from a quantitative perspective, you would look at the data and say, we're doing an amazing job in our department. Our department students feel like they belong, that they feel like they have a space in public health, that they feel welcomed, and that they have positive experiences. But in addition to that survey that we did within our department, we conducted focus groups with specific groups of individuals from minoritized backgrounds to understand their experiences. And within those data, we found that there are some not positive experiences happening in our department. And not just in the department, but sometimes these students were talking about experiences that they had across campus as well. And we realized that we need to provide some better resources, some better spaces, opportunities, et cetera, for these individuals, so that they can also be part of the majority of students who say that they are having a positive experience here on campus and at BYU. And as Jake mentioned, it's many of these students who are having not positive experiences who are then going back to their home wards and saying, don't go to BYU. It's not a positive space for people like you and me. And we need to change that narrative. One thing that we focused on in our department was thinking about mentorship, that oftentimes it's easy to mentor in your research people who look like you, who have similar experiences to you, because you connect easily with them. And I've been guilty of doing this myself frequently. I looked back at the number of students I'd mentored, and a lot of them had been white females that I thought many of these students need support because they may not have seen a female professor or those sorts of things. And I thought I need to do better. I did some self-reflection thinking about, why am I selecting or connecting with students who just look like me or have similar experiences to me. So I made a personal effort to move beyond that. And within our department, we established a scholarship, a mentored research opportunity for students who had diverse experiences. And it provided opportunities among colleagues in our department. We were only able with department funds to provide scholarships for 3 students, but these are 3 students who may not have had opportunities to receive one-on-one mentorship, to understand the research process, to consider what it might look like to get a master's degree or a PhD. And that can provide positive experiences for the individuals who may not have opportunities for mentorship or seek those opportunities because they don't know how to get involved, to maybe widen our applicant pool in the future, or to have them share experiences about how they were involved in research or those sorts of things. So I don't want to take too much time so they can share other experiences, but those are some of the initiatives I've been involved in that have been really helpful, I think, to providing better experiences to students. And as Jake mentioned, really enriching my personal life as well.
Thanks, Lori. Yes, it was also my privilege to serve with Lori on, I forget the ad hoc name of that, but whatever we named it. I'll reserve my comments to, as Jake said, one particular class that I have the most experience teaching here at BYU that applies to GE, that's History 221. Second half, that's the second half of the US History Survey. So it's supposed to be everything that happens essentially after Reconstruction, that period after the Civil War, right? That was really messy. So I came into BYU in 2018. I am a historian of race, immigration, and civil rights. That's my specialty, very much overlaps with Jake. And so I had this wonderful vision of how I was going to teach this class when I came to BYU, and I wanted to increase, provide my students access to diverse authors. That's all we read, right? People from different perspectives. That's always been built into what I do from the beginning. If I can just succinctly put it, imagine taking US history from a very multi-ethnic, multiracial, like multi-regional approach, right? We're learning from different people, different parts of the country, how they experience major shifting events, right? So that's always been the way I've taught this course at BYU. What has changed has been my understanding of my students and what I need to do to be more effective at reaching the very few students, and I want to emphasize that, which is maybe 5 to 10%, and this is roughly of class sizes that range from 40 to 50, right? And that's even high. So it's probably like maybe 2, maybe 3 students in each class just completely miss what I'm trying to do, right? And where did I get this impression? I looked at the ratings, right, for my first year at BYU. And I know that when I say student ratings, that maybe for a lot of us sparks trauma. And I'm not using that word lightly. Like, I looked these back up today, and as I was looking it up in the computer, my heartbeat started beating faster because I knew what I was going to read, right? And what made me feel a little bit better is that I had to go searching again for those stinging comments that hurt me really bad. Not just the comments that say, oh, he uses an elite vocabulary, oh, he lectures too much, oh, there's too much reading. Historians, we get that. Just, they got to suck it up, right? What else did they say? The ones that stung, right? The ones that I hadn't heard from other universities that I had taught at, right? Big universities like this. He was very biased. He taught a one-sided version of history. He thinks American history is racist. And the most hurtful one, he thinks all white people are racist. I'll be honest, when I first read those comments, I wanted to leave this university. I wanted to abandon those students. I figured, why do I have to try to convince them otherwise, right? Like, why do I need to make up for the socio-cultural circumstances they are raised in? Because that's what it boils down to. Again, another 95% of the comments were phenomenal, right? I was achieving my aims, right? And my goals as an instructor. I was, they're broadening their perspective. We were learning to think critically together, right? All that, but I couldn't, the comments, and I'm sure, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, the comments that keep us awake at night, You know, the comments that I think about every time I have to start planning for this class again are these ones. So what did I learn from reading those comments? And I'm just going to focus on one aspect of it, right? There's a whole laundry list, right? I learned that some students, despite my best intentions, were misunderstanding my intentions, right? And I could either choose, and this has been a process, okay? I'm not going to say I learned this overnight or in a semester or 2 semesters. It's taken the whole time I've been here, and I continue to work on it, right? To not want to just forget them, right? Because it takes a ton of work to try to figure out how do I reach the student that comes to class believing that from the first day that I am whatever, right? Because that's the environment they're raised in, right? I mean, we've all lived through the past few years, right? Many of us were raised in earlier generations, right? I grew up in the 80s and 90s predominantly. Political partisanship existed then too, right? But not like this, right? And I didn't enter a classroom having the world and algorithms, computer programs, right? Apps completely feed me the things that I only want to hear. So I've had to understand that that's, to those students, perhaps that maybe is why they are interpreting what I'm doing in that way. So what can I do about it, right? Well, one thing that I changed, and I can't go through everything, is I spend a ton of time in class the first 2 weeks. I'm using history content, but I'm teaching nothing but information literacy. I'm teaching nothing about how do we analyze sources, right? How do we determine how to get to accurate information, right? How do historians do it? How do we do it broadly in society? There's a lot of just wonderful resources for this. If you want some of them, you can email me and I'll show you some of the readings that I have to do this. But essentially that is what my class has become. I could honestly care less what they learn about history. I really don't care, you know, because they're going to forget it, right? Whatever event, whatever I like, they're going to forget. I want them to learn from history, right? That's the key. How can I use, right, the methods that I have, the knowledge that I have in my discipline, right, to teach them how to handle this world, right? How to not think of, you know, the person from the other political party or from the state, right? The state that I come from, right, has a bad rap, right? Apparently everybody's liberal and progressive, even though we have more Republicans than pretty much everyone else in the West, right? But how I have to understand that, right? That our students are coming in through no fault of their own in many ways, right? It's just the environment, right? And particularly Gen Z with, you know, access to the world at their fingertips, right? It's what they've been filtered constantly, right? So I just keep that continuously in mind, right? Every lecture, I've lectured very little now, at least in this class, the discussions, the assignments, everything we do. How am I teaching them to handle this incredibly polarized society that we live in, right? To not think of their brothers and sisters as evil, right? Automatically. And some of these things kind of sound maybe a little funny, but they are really real. And I think as educators, at least I feel for myself as an educator, again, the content is just a means, right? My discipline is just a means to teach much bigger lifelong lessons. And it's my hope that my students can, and it's not my hope my students, because again, 95%, they've always gotten it, right? But it's how do I get to that 2 or 3, right? How do I get to that 2 or 3? Because if maybe I can only reach 1 out of the 3, right? It can be transformational. And by reaching that again, I'm not wanting them to think the way I do, right? I'm just teaching them how to look from different perspectives, right? How to analyze from different perspectives, how to understand from different experiences. You can feel and believe as you want. Your truth is your truth. There is other truth, right? And then there's other ways that we evaluate actual truth, right? So I'll leave it with that. Hopefully I didn't go too much over my time.
Thanks, DJ. Thanks, Lori. Thanks, Jake. Yeah, I've had the great pleasure of working with each, except for Jake. We've communicated through email and finally get to meet in person, but worked with Lori with Global Women's Studies and with DJ with Civil Rights Seminar. My name is Mike Taylor. I teach Native American and Indigenous Studies in the English department and teach also in the American Studies program. And in American Studies and English, that's where I teach courses that our majors take to fulfill GE requirements. I don't teach any currently, at least, courses that are open to any student on campus, but I also help to develop the Native American rights civil rights seminar. I help lead our department's diversity and belonging committee, and also serve on the College of Humanities Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And I'll just keep mine brief. I, like DJ, like Lori and Jake, some of the things that we've been working through is how do we actually reach all of our students? I came to BYU also in a similar set. I studied Native American Studies. I didn't once have a Native American author on a course syllabus until my PhD. After I had done an undergrad here in American literature as my main emphasis, then a master's of American Studies. So I came determined that my students are going to read Native authors. The problem that happens when you do that is that your student evaluations, a lot of them are great. And then some of them say things like, but I still love America, even though I took this course. I've actually had that comment with student evaluations. And at first I didn't care about that student. I thought, who cares? They just don't get it. And I'm trying to figure out, how do I create a space of belonging in my classrooms and a department and a college culture that is that space like Jake was talking about, where minority students feel welcome, feel an actual sense of belonging, feel safe enough to speak up and share experiences, but also isn't ostracizing the mats in the classroom. That's inviting them into a relationship of belonging as well. Because like DJ is pointing out, we're in this culture where a lot of our students are coming preconditioned to be on the defensive to all this liberal nonsense that we're all trying to brainwash them to believing. So one of the things that actually has transformed, and just happened this last semester for me, of trying to think of how I go about doing this in my own classrooms, was the civil rights seminar that I participated on. Jenny, I see you here. Jenny was with us. It was a class that had 12 students, 10 of them were Native American, 2 non-Native students. And as part of the course, we took them to South and North Dakota to meet with Native organizations, tribal leaders, things like that. When we came back, we had a presentation to the community, and each of the students presented in any format they wanted to share the knowledge and share the experience that they thought that they'd really gathered from this trip together and from the course. And I couldn't believe how many students in that group said it was the first time they felt like they actually belonged to BYU. And like Jake was saying, and DJ and Lori were also talking about, a lot of them come with a lot of angst into this BYU space, but feeling like God told them they have to come here, or that they're fulfilling family expectations to be the first one in their family to finally get into university or something. A number of those students come from homes that don't have electricity or running water, and they're in Utah. This is a very different space for those students. And because we tried to create a space intentionally where they belonged, it caused them to actually feel like, wait a second, I belong in this whole BYU space. It's not just a single course that I belong, but I actually have something to contribute to the whole community. So when I got back from that trip, I actually shifted all of my courses that semester, all of my English department courses. We had a little in-class council in each of those classes. And I said, all right, I just had an epiphany and we need to change how we're doing things. So good luck. But what I try to do is have a much more open conversation in the day-to-day about the power of narrative and the narratives we consume and the narratives that we produce and how they're impacting the people around us, whether that's in our day-to-day interactions with one another or actually the things we're putting in writing in social media and we're putting in writing in our various class assignments and so on. So one of the things that I think is applicable across the GE, across campus, is recognizing that the knowledge that we consume and the knowledge that we start to produce in whatever discipline we're in informs this larger narrative about this BYU space and who belongs in it and who doesn't. And so I guess I'll just leave it with that I think it's applicable in each of our disciplines to think about, how do I use my own disciplinary skill set, my own disciplinary sources to promote classrooms and a campus of belonging for the students who naturally don't feel like they belong, and for the students who feel like it's their privilege to be here and others don't belong. So.
Okay, should we do 2 questions? Is that okay? Is that authorized? All right. All right, take maybe one from upstairs and one downstairs. I know the folks upstairs. I'll make sure, yes. Yeah.
One thing that's been really uncomfortable for me, and is at my own growth point, is being okay with the criticisms that come from individuals who probably also need to reflect and grow. Sometimes when I see these comments on my reviews or phone calls, because I've been in some media report or whatever else happens, people upset with me talking about race, belonging, those sorts of things, I sometimes want to retreat and say, just kidding, I don't want to do that then, because it feels uncomfortable to me. But I recognize that there are individuals who are experiencing this uncomfortability every single day, and the least I can do is experience it from time to time and stand up for that and not be afraid and want to retreat. So I'm always doing that self-reflection. Like if I try and diversify my author list or say something in class that may make students uncomfortable, the majority of students uncomfortable, I choose like, oh, I don't want to say that. I have to recognize that that's my own fragility, and that I need to confront that personally, that I'm doing a disservice to students if I don't try and enter that space just because of some negative comments from 2 or 3 people.
Yeah, all the authors of everything that I assign would all come from an underrepresented or minoritized category, right? And the fortunate thing is, like, I don't have to look hard. In my discipline, it is just flat out the best scholarship. You look up immigration history, women and women of color are pumping out the best stuff. Like, is that a racial comment? No, it's just like a fact, right? So, but I understand, like, one thing that I do is I teach them how to read those books, and I teach them, or materials, or an essay, right? And I teach them how to fact check, right? The people we're reading, right? We look into, so for example, as we begin a new reading, we will practice information literacy by, I'll say, okay, Google search this author, right? I want you to tell me all about this author's life, right? What are their qualifications? What's their perspective, right? Where were they born, right? What is shaping, right, who they become, right? And we talk about that for every different author, right? And we do that because then obviously if we're reading a white woman, right, who was, as one of our authors is, born and raised in New England, went to elite institutions, her perspective is very different than the indigenous woman that we're going to read too, right? It doesn't, class, et cetera, racial, everything. So we do that activity, right? That helps to reinstill the information literacy practices that I'm trying to inscribe with them. That is that, yeah, you don't have to trust me. You don't have to just take this off of face value and say that this person is qualified. Let's look up in the classroom and see their qualifications. And then we're going to do that for every other author or every podcast. We have podcasts we listen to in our class. Any type of content I give them, we look it up, right? And then we discuss what it is the person brings to the table, how that shapes their interpretation of the past, how it shapes their selection of the materials that they use, right? And in that way, I'm being very transparent. And I'm showing them not only am I modeling what historians do, right? Because that's what we do, right? But also like what we can all do, right? The way we should all think about the type of materials that we come in contact with.
Yeah, thanks. First, I just encourage you, you're going to get 99% of your student reviews are going to love your course because you're doing something different. But I actually love what you're doing. Like Jake was saying, growing up with Black Santa Claus in church is different than someone trying to tell you that Santa Claus is actually Black when you didn't have that growing up. And so what you're doing is just saying, these are the best writers that move me the most in this genre. And rather than making a course about race per se, it's a course about all these big questions that magical realism causes us to ask. And people from different communities are the ones causing you to confront those questions. And so I really like I think that's something that's also applicable across GE. When we talk about diversifying the curriculum or something, it doesn't mean we're teaching every single course about race. It's who are we turning to as our knowledge keepers on this topic? Who are we turning to provoke the best types of questions that actually cause us to confront the realities we'd like our students to confront? So if you talk about that in the beginning of your class, I'm not doing this as some statement on politics. These are just the best magical realist writers who I love to read. And they cause me to encounter these questions in really important ways. Then it turns into like a black Santa Claus that's just normal. And not this, here goes another liberal academic trying to brainwash me into thinking other races are as great as whites.
I got one other comment. The thing that's been my superpower has been my classes on Black pioneers in the church. I've got a new one featuring Ignacio Garcia, who's our colleague on Mexican Americans in the church, Native peoples. And thanks to your students, Mike, we've got some new readings on Native students at BYU. Anytime you can have that overlap of people with such a powerful testimony that's undeniable, who are a member of your faith community, or maybe of a different race or gender or so forth, that overlap is just, people just can't argue with that. And it's been a spiritual experience for the students, particularly about Black pioneers. And I think a lot of us, if you say, oh, can you name 10 Black pioneers, right? Like a lot of people aren't going to get to 10, okay? And when they learn about them, it has blessed all of the students. And I can tell you, my students of color of all races, they look at the Black pioneers as their model, as, you know, as they really look up to them, and they feel so empowered by their faith and their strength. And so that has been something that's really helped neutralize some of that pushback. But each one of us has to figure that out on our own, what it's going to be. But having that shared foundation that my colleague told me. So Chip, do we need to end now? Okay. Thank you so much to this panel. You guys have been great. We'll be around for lunch too. Thank you, guys.